The year is 2005. Red Bull have just begun their first official endeavor as a full-on racing outfit in Formula 1, and by just about every available measure, it immediately proves that they are more formidable than the previous owners, and it only took 113 laps to do so. They would pass the former Jaguar-owned team's grand total of 10 points in just the second round of a grueling 19. In that following year, Red Bull would scoop up the remains of the Minardi team. They'd end up getting really creative with the name, just Italian Red Bull, literally. And there was the birth of the sister squad where the two teams have competed side by side ever since. The typical scheme seemed to be working, whereby Red Bull would filter driver talent through the newly acquired Toro Rosso counterpart and vet them until they were ready to produce F1 points for the, historically speaking at least, stronger of the two aligned racing teams. At least, it worked notably on 3 occasions to produce multi-race winners. And since then, they've never deviated from the path, aside from one lone occasion early on in the venture into the sport where they opted to pair Mark Webber with David Coulthard for the 2007 championship. The team saw a couple of splits that season. The near-identical chassis would be on top of a different power. Toro Rosso, maintaining their Italian ties, would fulfill the team's obligation to run Ferrari engines, while the A squad would be fueled by Renault power. Additionally, Red Bull parted ways with Vittorio Luizzi and the American racer Scott Speed. This move made Webber the first outsider Red Bull would call up to the top team in its short history. And little did he know, he'd carry that torch for more than a dozen years. Since the Aussie made his Red Bull debut in front of his home crowd in 2007, not a single driver has driven for Red Bull's top team since. And the 2020 season presented Red Bull with an option. They could continue honoring the code of internal promotion, or they could hire a driver like Sergio Perez. But I really doubt you're here just for me to read you a headline. So, without further ado, here's the case for Sergio Perez. And ironically, to talk about Checo, it actually makes the most sense, in my opinion, that we talk about Max Verstappen. It's an odd situation when your best driver actually poses problems for the development of younger talent. I don't think that I'm the first person to speculate on this, but I've always been of the opinion that Red Bull's expectations to win have always been flattered by having drivers deliver stellar performances, and in their peak, probably should have been with the World Championship capable outfit. I don't often toot any driver's horn unless it serves a purpose to the story I'm telling, but it's important to note here that Ricciardo's 2014 was poetry in motion. He'd stick around until his shock move to Renault, but before that, Red Bull of course had employed the likes of Verstappen. Given so much of Formula 1 is about the gap to your teammate and, mostly, equal machinery, it's near impossible for anyone to keep pace with Max. Beyond the obvious intervals we can count on our clocks, there's also an emotional toll that this takes. There's no quantitative models I've ever found to predict just how many tenths of a second a driver loses from stress. But it's pretty safe to say the situation both Gasly and Albon were thrusted into weren't exactly ideal. But that's really not going to matter to Red Bull, who have their own pressure to worry about, and that's delivering a car that is capable of keeping Max around long enough until regulation shifts give them an opening. Given the new freezes the FIA has imposed, their job just got a lot harder. It's safe to assume if Red Bull misses out on too many results, it could trigger an exit for Verstappen. And after seeing Russell dominate so much of Bahrain, there's clearly a bright future ahead for the Briton. Hamilton can't and won't drive forever, and let's get real, Valtteri probably has one more year in that seat. Given the news that Toto Wolff has just signed on for an additional 3 years, it's a good bet that the team will be here in the near future, so the looming threat of losing the Honda power after the works deal expires in 2021 is palpable. The problem that plagues Red Bull is that they don't have a driver that can stay close enough to Max that will give the outfit opportunities to mix it up more with Mercedes. Valtteri has proven to be a liability at times with the leading car, and the Arrows have few vulnerabilities in the package itself, and even less so in Hamilton. But 2020 proved that if there was a driver that can keep relatively close, even just on strategy, then Verstappen is likely the best bet. Now they just need the opportunities. This was very similar to what we saw in 2017. It's the same campaign that we saw responsible for showing that even a car near parity, the SF70, isn't going to be enough to beat Hamilton. But not often mentioned is the dreadful year Kimi had, at least compared to his teammate. Vettel racked up 55 more points that season and earned nearly double the podiums. Just as it would be instrumental for Vettel to have Kimi closer to play in the strategy games and grab a couple more key wins, Verstappen has found himself unable to benefit in a similar manner, as he's amassed 104 more points, more than double the 2020 season total of Albon. Drivers like Sergio Perez, on the other hand, managed to do a lot more with a lot less. At least that's what it seems like. After missing 2 races, he has still put 5 other drivers between himself and his teammate, Lance Stroll. And in all, Sergio Perez has scored in the points 87% of the time for the 2020 season. He's had some unlucky breaks, critically 2 car failures alternating 2 very strong performances, but he still found a way to recover, and with an average finish rate of 6.5, he had undoubtedly a strong year. But there's an elephant in the room that must be addressed. When we are giving thought to how a driver performs, we must consider the critical element of what the car was capable of. Isn't it a little bit ironic that the same people that appeal to how horrendous it is for Racing Point to just copy the former championship dominant car are the same people who will also say that Albon needs to go? Now, with that said, it is an imperfect comparison and I'm the first to say it, but I trust you're intellectually capable of suspending the very factual assertion that, of course, the chassis are different, and the cars obviously are not identical. You can do that long enough for a thought experiment. The point is, generally speaking, Racing Point's 2020 Challenger was a very strong car. There are a couple of things that can be pointed out that make this a really interesting analysis, and I think once re-examined, we can look at the situation and consider it in a new light. The second driver's quote-unquote dramatically impacted the optics of what the other driver's results were. This played out in different ways, or at least should be explained differently. With Racing Point, the data suggests much was left on the table for Lance. Sergio would drive much better comparatively in those moments and overshadow the results of the sister car. And with Verstappen, there were many scenarios where his pace and near-perfect driving at times would make it difficult to assess what to expect out of that second car. If you followed this channel for any decent amount of time, you'll know I fight this idea that a driver, quote, outperforms a car, end quote, just isn't possible. But better drivers ride closer to the limits of the car on a more consistent basis and make fewer mistakes doing so. I would agree that Fernando Alonso did this habitually, but that alone doesn't make it a valid point. And this is due to the fact that, like Alonso, Max was paired next to a driver that did not achieve this. But this is different than saying the driver dropped the ball. Albon did make mistakes, but his drought was a far cry from the one that we saw from Lance in 2020. Here's what I mean. Lance had 2 podiums all season long, Monza and Bahrain. Interestingly, between those third place finishes, the Canadian would score a grand total of 2 points. Comparatively, Checo would rack up 48 points in that stretch. And statistically speaking, Checo performed marginally better in those races than he would on average all season long. Those 48 points he scored reflected 38% of his season's total, spanning 15 Grand Prix he entered, or 33% of his season. And digging deeper into the data, it becomes clear that what Sergio did with the car may have been more of a proper representation of what the car could do. If you remove races Lance failed to classify, which was a whopping 6 Grand Prix, he'd end the season with an average finish rate of P7 compared to Sergio's 6.5. When Lance was performing, he wasn't too far off Checo. In fact, the head-to-head when both drivers were classified reflects this. Because Racing Point was plagued with many different circumstances that affected their season, it was actually more common that both drivers wouldn't finish a race in 2020. But when they both did, the count would be 4-4. Put it like this, and I want you to answer honestly, and again, this is a thought experiment. If Lance had indeed scored 120 points to Sergio's 125, would that impact your view of his 2020 performance? I'm aware this was not the case, and I'm certainly not going to revise history and suggest that Lance Stroll should have scored some phantom total. He didn't. And Sergio found a way to get the job done. My only challenge here is maybe this is what Lance should have done, unless Sergio did something not possible. This is in no way, shape, or form an attempt to dilute what Sergio did this season. It's simply a recalibration of the data, looking at the head-to-head stats and what was left on the table compared to the teammate. This is a sport where the margins do matter, remember? And if it is indeed just another quote pink Mercedes end quote, is it possible that this is more a story of what Lance could have done, should have done? And this brings us neatly to the second point, which is Max's dominant form. He achieved something that just isn't really that reasonable. At every single race, apart from the P6 in Istanbul, he was on the podium. It's a stat I tracked pretty closely all season long and mentioned this on Twitter because it does matter in this era. And if you're looking for reference to understand what that really means, Lewis has managed to pull this off in the Mercedes reign during the turbo hybrid era on just 2 occasions. 2014 in all races, in 2015 just like Max, all but 1 P6, just like Max. But keep in mind where it's not just like Max, Lewis did it with the most dominant car. And not only that, he's gone on to win 4 additional championships where he fell short of this feat. And at this point, I don't even know why I'm saying this, but the purpose is in no way to compare Max to Lewis, or even allude to him being just as skilled. That's not the point of what I'm saying, so if you're about to angry type, just stop. The purpose is to position the skewed results at Red Bull as having something to do with the fact that it's not possible to ask a driver to measure up to this mark. Now, Alex did have his string of rotten results bookended by a pair of P3s, just as Stroll did. But he'd at least manage 7 points and limit the stretch to just 5 races. But remember how I referenced Sergio earned 48 points in Stroll's stretch? How do you think that compares to Verstappen? Hint, it's pretty brutal. Verstappen took 60 points to Albon's 7. To put that in perspective, when translated to what that looks like by race, Max would take 12 points per Grand Prix during the stretch. This is significantly more punishing than Checo's stretch, for which he takes 6.9 points per Grand Prix. And that's just on Sunday, a place Verstappen has found no trouble finding his form. But arguably, the Dutchman has been a very strong qualifier over his career. And this has been some of the main drivers to what led to issues for Red Bull with Albon, who had struggled over 1.5 seasons on Saturdays comparatively speaking. It's worth pointing out here that over his career, The weakest part of Checo's repertoire would be his Saturday performance, where the Red Bull has to shine. The tactical advantage that Albon has had a habit of squandering in 2020, it doesn't really appear to be resolved now that they've acquired the services of Sergio Perez. Now, Sunday on the other hand, well, that's a different story. The veteran driver who just took his first win will be there. We've seen in some races in 2020 it being a case of just a little bit too little, too late. But it does make you think, what portion of that can reasonably be concluded due to the pressures that Albon was consistently put under while his seat was yet again in question? I mentioned the same thing for Pierre, and it's just as valid for the young Thai driver. And now that we've addressed the actual performance numbers, let's talk about the other factors that might also have weighed into the decision of keeping Checo. At its most severe, what kind of gap would you expect between Perez and Albon in the same car? Whatever your answer, keep that one in the back of your mind. As stated at the start of this video, since the inception of the racing team we know today, there's only been one outsider that has driven for the top team, not filtering through the sister squad. Now consider what this signals to the young drivers in the Red Bull Academy, and some of the grid's best talent is a product of the energy drinks DA. The reason they are able to be a wild card in many seasons post the Newey era, now in the turbo hybrid era, in part is because they've been anchored by at least one of the drivers seeming punching above their weight, so to speak. You always got the sense that either Daniel Ricciardo or Max Verstappen would be in a Ferrari or a Merc soon enough, but for now, they're in Red Bull. The Red Bull scheme depends on developing their talent, and you must admit this is not the same that we see sometimes with Ferrari and Mercedes who just get world champions switching over, and we don't really have to look that hard for proof of this. The most recent 2 world champions are a product of this. And to a degree, it works. It just so happens that right now, we're in a unique situation. Red Bull have consistently invested into Max Verstappen, and in the beginning helped him develop into the world-class driver we know today. And over the years, they've kept him in a car that can't necessarily give him the tools to win a championship just yet. The problem is, we're also caught in one of the longest spells in the history of the sport without major changes to the regulations taking place. I mean, think about it. Go back and look at the height of the KERS era, the V8 era, the real turbo era, the driver aids era, and over the years, it's become increasingly more clear that the technology is outpacing exponentially the pace at which the sport advances. And my point here is, as we become more and more modern, it becomes much more important that the regulation changes happen more frequently. Next season will mark the 8th year without broad sweeping changes. It's at this time you see drivers like Verstappen have their patience pay off and Red Bull adapt to the new regs to deliver the title-winning car they promised Max. Or maybe they won't, and Max will make his way to a car he thinks is worth it. The cycle of top-level drivers moving around, it works itself out. But Max essentially is overqualified for the car he has currently, and this isn't some hard and fast rule that has to happen necessarily. But a driver who makes that few mistakes doesn't normally stay in a car that can't win a title for nearly a decade. But I know what you're thinking, and it's the right thought. He has no option. But I'd contest that what is for certain is that Red Bull sticking with their internal promotion policy, that's a strong bargaining chip that no other team can really tout. For the most part, if you're a young driver and you're looking to join the Red Bull Academy, you know what you're up against long term. Just take a look inside your own program. And you have to admit, there's something very comfortable about that. And you could see how a young, talented driver could make the case that the Red Bull option is a little bit better if they wanted quicker opportunity, given that the sister squad is usually used as a filtering ground for young talent. You're confident that Red Bull won't hire externally. When spots open up, there's a good chance that if you're positioned properly, because you've been loyal and stayed put within the team, that could be repaid with a promotion. But now let's ask the question now that we know for sure that Sergio Perez has been retained for the 2021 season. Let's say you're a junior winning series titles across the globe, and you're an up-and-coming driver who's offered a spot in the Red Bull Academy. Would you take the seat if you just saw that Red Bull was filling it with outsiders out of the blue? Would you risk your entire junior career if it was possible that a driver who had just won a single race in nearly 200 attempts just took your seat that you were being asked to wait half a decade for? And I know what some of you are thinking, it's a similar situation at Renault. But where it deviates is the opening at Renault was not as a result of the team firing one of their young program graduates. Well, 2 I suppose in this situation. There was a seat open and the team very much needed to find some strong results as a new rebrand is underway. Not to mention, the race team always is seemingly perpetually in question. And on top of all of that, there was no driver who qualified for the amount of super license points, at least not at that time when the decision was needed. And Renault needed to show the board that they were very serious about the long-term potential of the team, which required a short-term statement be made. Losing Daniel Ricciardo does leave a big hole, but it's hard to argue that hiring Fernando Alonso doesn't plug that hole right back up and then some in some ways. I mean, come on, even Ricciardo fans know that commercially, in the very least, this is a strong move. Having a world champion as a temporary solution is about as good as it gets given the circumstances. As we've seen from Pierre's season in 2020, the pressures of the situation can surely impact the performance of the drive. This doesn't exactly bode well for him in his future. So if you're Pierre and you're called back up, you should know that depending on the circumstances and availability of other outside drivers, Your affiliation with the Red Bull Driver Academy means exactly fuck all. And as such, proceeding with the hiring of Checo, this undermines the very element that is the greatest strength of the team. The opportunity and hope for a young driver to bet it all with Red Bull. They finally have drivers with super license credentials. They've managed this far. Why break now? And while writing this, trying to think through it myself, I used Julian Palmer's recent analysis about this to actually contrast the situation to really draw out my own conclusions. And just to be clear, I'm not picking on Palmer at all. It's actually pretty rare I find myself opposite him in an argument. But since I do this time, and I think it echoes the sentiment of the majority, let's just take a look at what he said so we can draw a contrast against it. If Red Bull want to be seen as a genuine championship contender next season, then they must switch from a second driver who has underperformed. Surely, even the most blinkered of the Red Bull management can't look past the latest F1 winner as the option moving forward. And this entire statement, it falls victim, in my opinion, to one of the oldest tropes in debate, and that's predicated on a faulty premise. So the major premise, Red Bull wants to be seen as a genuine championship contender, with the minor premise being any driver that doesn't deliver the results on or near parity of Verstappen is underperforming. And it's that minor premise right there that acts in this argument, but also in the minds of many F1 fans, that needs to be reconciled. How are we measuring performance? And then you'll notice the syllogism start to break down. The conclusion would be the switch to Perez will result in Red Bull becoming a championship contender thanks to him not underperforming as Albon did. And once again, I'm handling this objection just because I think it's what a lot of people think, and why else are you here other than to be challenged? So, number one, are we to expect that Red Bull can find a package to usurp Mercedes at the top of the throne? Even if you had two Verstappens, are we saying that that's possible? Christian Horner has actually spoken specifically about this. Here's what he had to say. So I don't really think he's expecting to take the double. I mean, at best, they can genuinely believe that Max can fight for the title, maybe, but in reality, they're looking to maximize results and wherever possible, give Max a chance at 25 points. Which leads us to number two, which is the assumption that Perez is the solution. And logically speaking, this wouldn't hold up. Even if Perez is light years quicker than Albon, and let's not forget, I do rate him high and I've talked about it consistently, it's still going to be short of a Constructors' Championship. The car won't allow for it. So really for me, this falls back on the argument I made previously. That is, what is the cost of the incremental gain of hiring Checo to the future of your young drivers program that is responsible for all of the team's success? It's expected Sergio Perez won't perform at the same level as Verstappen. Most people accept that. And I certainly don't work for Red Bull. They're a major race outfit. The decisions they make, you have to go with. I'm just here to ask the questions. I recommend you answer this question before the season starts so you don't have to move the goalposts. How close does Checo have to be to Verstappen to be not underperforming? And let's play it out. Let's say Checo strolls in there, pun intended, and starts to perform out of the box. Is the idea that he'll play the second driver role? I mean, remember, that's why he's there. Keep in mind, my argument is not that Red Bull have handled the DA perfectly, or even that the DA is the most effective means to produce successful Formula One drivers. My argument is simply that as it relates to the current situation, given new regulations are around the corner, and that so much of the Red Bull scheme depends on faith in the driver academy, I'm making the assumption Checo would only get so much out of the car. And what he's able to get out of the car that's above and beyond Alex Albon, because I do think he would pull more from the car, as I see it, it doesn't compensate for the damage long-term to the team. Because what if Verstappen leaves? Much of the car, at least 60%, according to Christian Horner, is going to be carryover. Max knows where he stands for 2021. Is it going to be enough to keep him? And we haven't even touched on the fact that Verstappen and Perez have a history of sometimes not playing so nice with their teammates. Okay, maybe that was a bit of an understatement. I'm not going to spend too much time on this though. Do drivers grow up? Yes. Do they mature? Sure. Have we seen drivers fairly easily revert back to this behavior occasionally, despite changing their behavior? Yes. So while I do think it's important to be mindful when you're making considerations here that the drivers have had run-ins in the past with their teammates, I'll let you make your own assessment from there. And now we get to probably the most important part of this video. There is only one scenario in which Checo is a no-brainer. And just so we're very clear, I'm making this video as such to try to be objective, to make sure I'm hitting on both sides and make sure there's something in it for everyone. But it's still Thursday at time of recording. Alexa, what day is it?
It's Thursday, December 17th.
So unless I can fake that, which rhetorical, I can't. I'm sure someone will say I am, but you know, this is me still recording this the day before it gets announced, assuming it gets announced tomorrow. But I still think Sergio will be in that seat. I think that option, whatever I end up titling it in the video, it'll be more important that they keep Max than it will be about the blemish that it takes that the driver academy takes. So there's no cuts in this. I'm not faking this. It's Thursday. So that's what I think is going to happen. I want to set the record straight. I'm not reacting to this. I'm not, it's very easy to call a prediction after it happens. So I just want to get some skin in the game, make sure you all knew. I still think Sergio is going to be the pick. I could be wrong, but no matter how hard I tried to assume the other position, I can't see them picking Albon with the idea and the potential for Max to say long-term when Adrian Newey gets a hands of the new regulations.
1 week later.
As discussed, I reject this idea that Red Bull is trying to become a, quote, championship contender. That's not why I saw Checo in the seat, at least not directly. That smoking gun is Verstappen's contract. While the Dutchman's inked agreement with Red Bull expires at the conclusion of 2023, you can absolutely guarantee it was riddled with safe harbor opt-out clauses. But of course, this isn't new. If you've been following Formula 1 for any decent amount of time, you're likely very aware of this concept. So hear me out. In this scenario, Max brings more to the table than Red Bull does, as the Silver Arrows still lay claim to the dominant car, and Max happens to be in the form of his life. With the new regulations set to kick in for the 2022 season, it would almost be irresponsible for Verstappen not to have an escape clause available in order to fairly assess his future and be able to react to any movement in the driver's market. Whatever it takes to keep Verstappen long enough to give Adrian Newey a shot to adapt a package to exploit the new regulations for race wins. And it's this idea, if you're looking for some sort of logical reason, if you're an Albon fan and you can't just swallow this is something you can actually hold on to, because it does make a lot of sense. Simply put, Red Bull would be willing to sacrifice the DA blemish by putting Checo in the second seat, which may only lead to a few more incremental wins for the team due to these performance clauses that are likely going to be in play. A handful of wins here and there could mean the difference between a future with Max and without him. But like I stated, we can't know this for sure. Ironically, the input that carries the most weight is the one that's most shrouded in secrecy. So in conclusion, with everything happened with Red Bull and the power unit, the changes to the new regulations, all of the questions that are happening around the sport, would you rather have Verstappen or not? The answer is probably the former. And as discussed before, which hopefully now makes a lot more sense, if you're Red Bull, a team that's seemingly always somehow punching up, you need drivers like Verstappen. You need drivers that over-deliver. The trick is, they're hard to come by. And with the regulations changing, this is it. This is your chance to keep Max long-term. And for the 9th time, even though it doesn't matter, someone's still going to say it. The point isn't to say that Checo doesn't deserve that seat. I wouldn't even use that word at all. He has more than proven he's capable, but for the sake of Red Bull long-term and all the drivers they have in the hopper, let's just hope it works out. I suppose if it doesn't, Red Bull may not be having a future to speculate on, period. But we've still got to work these things out. And with a decision of this magnitude that even speaks to the future of Red Bull as a team, it was worth the challenge. I hope you feel the same way. I appreciate your time. Thanks for being here. And before I go, honestly, thanks to everyone so much for being so patient over the last couple of months. While I always knew at some point that sort of battle was going to incur with the sport, it's a little bit different when you're having to deal with it real time. And you guys made it really easy. You were very supportive, and more importantly, you were just patient. And that's all I can ask for. So I'll be repaying you back in this offseason. Get ready for more content than I've ever produced. But for now, back to work. I'll see you very, very soon.